Hello, welcome back to Excelling Psychology. This is Jyotika. I'm just continuing with the lesson in which we are discussing how we should answer paper 2, taking the example of May-June 2022 paper. If you haven't already, please watch the first 3 parts of this lesson. I will link them in the description box below. Watching those parts will help you understand what we are doing exactly in this lesson better, and it will help you to come logically to this part. Okay, so now I'll just begin, and as always I will first read out the question that is presented. 𝗬𝗏 is conducting a study on social behavior in animals. She is investigating whether animals are more sociable when they are in a large laboratory cage or a small laboratory cage. 𝗬𝗏 has to decide which species to use. Explain how one ethical guideline relating to animals would affect her decision. Okay, like I was telling you last time, CIE is becoming increasingly specific with the wording of their questions, because though it would seem obvious, somehow students start discussing human ethical guidelines even when it is the research scenario has something to do with animals. So here they've been very specific. They've said relating to animals. And as I've told you earlier, when it comes to any ethical question involving ethics, definitely you have to name the ethical guideline that you're talking about. Don't just keep on elaborating on the guideline. Be very specific, name it, and then connect it with the study. Okay, now there are several guidelines related to animals, right from housing to how many number of animals should be used, to safe treatment of animals, safe and less injurious, less painful treatment, replacement. All those guidelines you must have gone through. Here you have to present any one. So definitely there's good flexibility, and you can decide based on that which one you would like to go ahead with. I think presenting species and strain here makes a lot of sense. So first I'll discuss this one. This is the most relevant guideline for this question. See, species and strain is all about using that particular species of animal for a research which is least likely to undergo distress and pain and harm when study is conducted with that species. And we can see that 𝗬𝗏 is yet undecided on which species she wants to use. That is the main thing about this question. So since she hasn't decided already, she can definitely make this consideration as to which animal will undergo the least harm, and then take that particular species for her study. So this guideline seems the most obvious. It is implicated in the question itself. Now, if we want to present this one as the answer, firstly we should explain, of course, what this guideline is about, then connect it to the study. Now, what we mean by connecting to the study is that since they haven't suggested which species 𝗬𝗏 is going to use, we should suggest some species which she can use. Okay, keep in mind that this question is for 2 marks. So one thing is that we have to, as always, complete it in 2 sentences, description, second connection. Okay, this formula works. Writing answers this way works because students get a structure in writing. Of course, there are different ways in which you can write, but this one seems to be the best. Now, when it comes to connecting, like I was telling you, see, 𝗬𝗏's purpose is putting the animal in cages. See, she's going to put them in a cage. So let's understand the question. Like I always tell you, whenever you see any scenario, first translate it to yourself. So in your own words, understand the purpose. She wants to, she's going to visualize her putting animals into cages. So either into a large cage or a small cage. Okay, which species do you think will get very distressed by being put in cages like this, and which species will not? So through your course, you have come across different studies, and you must have gone into their details. You must have realized that some animals like chimpanzees, monkeys, gorillas, which are close to humans, they are more likely to experience distress when they are put in cages. Okay, because they are not only physically large, but they are social by nature. Like I said, they are close to humans, so being put in cages like this would be too disturbing. So in species and strain, when our consideration is which species should be taken, of course we also have to consider which should not be taken. So this particular species, whom we call primates, should not be taken into the study. Then which one should be taken? Those animals can be taken who are usually accustomed to being in cages, who are many times bred for that very purpose, that they should be placed in cages so they don't undergo a lot of distress. Like we have the guinea pigs in the laboratory, or we have rats. They are a more suitable species. So this is what we can consider. Another guideline which I personally will not recommend, but which tends to fit in anywhere and which is pretty relevant here also, is housing. So it's like, I would suggest this if you're the type of student who tends to get very confused and run out of ideas. You're writing the paper, say maybe in a rush to meet the deadline, and you can't really think of which guideline is particularly relevant in this case. You can always discuss housing then. When it comes to housing for this particular study, the consideration is similar, but of course it appears that Tulip, when she's going to place the animals in cages, for a lot of time they will be in the cages only. So even in between the study, and at the background or behind the scenes also, they will be in the cages. That is what it seems like. So what Tulip can do in that case, because we are not considering species, we are not going to talk about exactly which species she should select, but then she can make sure that the housing is proper. So we'll talk about which housing, we'll become specific about which type of housing would be suitable for the animals. So when it comes to housing, we'll have to focus on the cage, because she's going to be housing the animals in the cage. So when it comes to cage, of course cage should be hygienic, it should be big enough, that is one thing. So whichever species she selects, if it's a chimpanzee that she's selecting, chimpanzees are huge, so the cage can be even bigger than the chimpanzee, so that the chimpanzee has free movement around. If she's taking a rat, then according to the size of the rat. So the cage should definitely be big enough, it should be well ventilated, it should be hygienic. So you could discuss these aspects as well. For now, I will go by the first one, species and strain. So I will show you how you can write this answer. Okay, so we'll write Tulip should consider the guideline of species and strain. Okay, so as I had told you, please name the guideline. That is very important. Okay, so you can see I have named it. Okay, now exactly, of course, what she should consider is what we have to elaborate on. She could select a species like rats or guinea pigs who are not likely to experience much strain in cages because they are accustomed to being in them. Okay, so as always, if I have to show you the marking, I think you must be knowing by now 1 mark for the naming of the guideline, so identifying it correctly, identifying a relevant guideline, and 2 is giving a suggestion which is suitable to the scenario given, so connecting it with the scenario. Okay, let's come to the next question. They are continuing with the same scenario as we would expect. Tulip is finding a median. She puts her scores in order. Okay, you know, for median, either in ascending or descending order, you have to arrange the scores. State what a researcher should do to find the median if there are 2 middle numbers. Very basic question. This is not directly related to the study. It's more of a generic question. You can see it has been allocated only 1 mark for that reason. They also haven't asked what Tulip should do specifically. They have just asked in general what should be done. Okay, when it comes to median, there are, as you learn in data analysis, median can be calculated for an odd total number of scores or an even total number of scores. The scenario they have presented us that, you know, there might be 2 numbers in between if we have arranged the scores in ascending or descending order. They are referring definitely to median for even number of scores. As you know, what we should do is if there are 2 numbers in between, say x and y, we should average these numbers. So whatever is the average of the 2 becomes the median. We can write that we should remove the average of the 2, that is correct, but to be more specific, we could, because they have said what the researcher should do. So again, we could just elaborate it very slightly on the procedure. So when I say taking the average of the middle 2 numbers, what I mean is to add their values and divide it by 2. So I'll just specify that. Okay, let's see how to write this answer. So we'll say the middle 2 numbers should be added and their sum should be divided by 2. Alright, very simple one. Let's come to the next question. Explain how Tulip would find the range of the number of sociable behaviors of the animals in the small cage. So again, data analysis question to do with range. Here it has been made specific to this scenario. So you can see it has been allotted 2 marks, and of course we will have to answer in terms of Tulip, her study. Those wordings should be there in our answer. Okay, range, as you know, is simply the difference between the largest number of a data set when it is arranged and the smallest number of that data set. So that's the general understanding of range. Now, if we are talking about how Tulip should find, so of course first she will calculate the frequency or the number of sociable behaviors being shown by the animal. So she'll calculate that. She'll arrange the frequencies or the counts in order. Okay, again, like in the previous question, we are being specific about what she'll do. So she'll arrange it in order. Once she arranges it in order, she'll find the highest frequency or the biggest number, the highest count, we can say. Okay, so say there's some animal who's shown 10 sociable behaviors. Say there is another animal who's shown only 2 sociable behaviors, so there'll be a lowest count also. Then she'll subtract the 2, so 10 minus 2 is 8, so she has to subtract the counts, subtract these 2 from each other. That's it. Okay, so as simple as that. Let's write the answer. Okay, so we'll specify Tulip would find the highest number of sociable behaviors by an animal and the lowest number. Then she would subtract the lowest from the highest number and take this difference as the range. Alright, another simple one. Let's come to the next question. Explain why it would be appropriate for tulip to use counterbalancing. So here we've come to the experimental design. If she chose a repeated measures experimental design. 3 marks question. We have to give a good explanation. It should justify our 3 marks. What is repeated measures design? All participants exposed to all levels of the independent variable, or we could say all conditions of the experiment. Which are tulip's conditions of the experiment? Large cage and small cage. So that means she'll be putting all the animals in small cages for some time and all the animals in large cages for some time. Okay, now what will happen when she does this? It could result in an order effect. Okay, so let's imagine she's putting all the animals in small cages first for a few days, or say 1 day also, or half a day also. Then she's putting all the animals in large cages. And again she's measuring their sociable behaviors. What type of order effect could take place? Either practice or fatigue. Let's consider fatigue first. Animals might get tired performing the same behaviors, in the sense they don't have to perform some kind of challenging task here. They're just showing their normal social behaviors, but being in that cage for half a day, 1 day, many days could be tiring. So by the time they reach to the next condition, which is the large cage condition, it could become their fatigue rather than the size of the cage, which is the independent variable, which could make them show lesser sociable behaviors in the second condition, right? I hope you're following all this. I hope your experimental designs are clear. Okay, and what if there's practice? Let's consider practice also. So first the animals are placed in small cages. They get accustomed to being in the cage. They learn how to be sociable in that cage, and by the time they reach to the large cage, they become more sociable. The opposite effect of the fatigue effect, they become more rather than less sociable, because now they've learned how to be sociable in a cage. Confounding would take place, because in the second condition it's not because of the size of the cage, which is the independent variable, but because of their practice that they are being more sociable. So now what to do to avoid these order effects? Counterbalancing. That's the solution which has been mentioned. Okay, so what can be done in the counterbalancing? Take half the animals. Say there are 50 animals in the study. Take 25. Have 25 undergo the small cage condition first, followed by the large cage condition. And the remaining 25 undergo the large cage condition first, followed by the small cage condition. Then, on the whole, we can see if there is any of these order effects, be it fatigue or practice. Because if it is, then irrespective of which condition the animal is put in later, he will perform poorly or better than in the first condition. It will become obvious that the size of the cage does not matter. Okay, so what I've given you is a generic, a specific revision of counterbalancing to this scenario. So I've explained to you the whole logic behind it. You also have to, like I told you, explain well in this answer because it is for 3 marks. What should be the structure of writing? I'll just explain that and then we'll write it. Of course, first thing is to name the issue which is addressed by counterbalancing, because they've asked us why is it appropriate to use counterbalancing. So of course there must be some issue which is being addressed by counterbalancing. Let's make that explicit first. The issue is order effects. I'll recommend not becoming specific about fatigue or practice here, but you can if you want to. Next is, of course, you have to specify, elaborate on the issue. Specify what problem is created. Okay. So specify the problem. Be relevant when you're specifying towards the research scenario. Like I explained to you what could be the problem. Finally, explain how counterbalancing resolves this problem. Okay. Now let's see how to put it into words. Okay, using a repeated measures design, could result in order effects. Okay, so I have not mentioned specifically fatigue or practice, I have written order effects, but in the next line, to explain what I mean by order effects, I'll give example of any one. I'm giving the example of fatigue, you could give the example of practice. For example, animals could experience fatigue upon being moved from one cage to the next after being observed for a while. I'll just break down this into another sentence so that it becomes too long. Then, due to their fatigue, rather than size of the cage, okay, so I'm naming the independent variable here. They might show lesser sociable behaviors in the second condition. Counterbalancing would resolve this by exposing half of all animals to one condition first and the other half to the second condition. This would help the researcher see any order effects. Okay, so I'll just tell you about the marking quickly, as would be obvious. We get 1 mark for naming the effect, the other mark for explaining what is this effect, what is the issue with this effect. Okay, and the third mark for explaining how or why counterbalancing how counterbalancing helps, basically that. Okay, so that's it for this question. I'm not taking up question 10 in this video. That's a lengthy question that is about designing the study and then picking out a weakness of that study. So that's pretty time consuming. I don't know when I'll come up with that video, but that deserves a separate video altogether because there's a lot of explanation also in that, and the answer itself is pretty long because it's a 10 marks answer. So that's it for this class. I will try my best to upload the next video soon. See you then.